Good afternoon. Thanks very much to the session organisers for the invitation to speak. What I'm going to do today is talk about the results of a project to create or attempt to create an immersive VR, AR experience at the Roman town of Venta Icenorum in Norfolk. We're here in the southeast of Britain. It's a site that is entirely unencumbered by modern development. It's now owned and managed by the Norfolk Archaeological Trust. And like the majority of archaeological sites that you find in the landscape, it's in open countryside. It's has no infrastructure, there is no museum or anything like that, and there is highly variable mobile phone signals. So that was some of the things that influenced our project, and this creates some challenges for any project involving the application of technology. It's a project that we did in collaboration with the Norfolk Archaeological Trust and also Jam Creative Studios, who are a Cardiff-based SME who work on on the use of VR in particular for heritage applications. I'll happily admit, in many ways, that I'm not a tech person. What drives me in this context is that I'm passionate about finding new ways to communicate archaeological findings to the general public. The use of reconstruction, the use of interpretive reconstruction drawings has a long history, of course, certainly in the UK. Alan Sorrell's first reconstruction drawings showing the Roman baths at Leicester, here for the Illustrated London News in 1936. So one of the first examples of the use of this type of reconstruction. And Sorrell's work then appeared on archaeological sites across the UK. And in some ways, Sorrell is in part responsible for the use of these kinds of reconstructions as quite a standard tool for the public interpretation of archaeological sites. Reconstructions, though, are also ideological statements that represent particular views of the past and in relation to Roman Britain and other interpretations of the past. It shows Rome as often as a superior and civilizing entity, and predominantly one that is white and male. And these, of course, have risks associated with them in that very vague ideas can become quite canonical through the solidarity of these types of reconstructions. These sorts of things can cause quite significant debate. This is the University of Reading's reconstructions of the so-called ivory bangle lady from York. And the publication of reconstructions of the ivory bangle lady, who's a wealthy woman of mixed race, probably from North Africa, stimulated some vitriolic responses of the type that now characterises discourse on social media in the UK in particular at the moment. And we have things like this. Everyone knows what the average English person looked like 40 years ago. What's the point pretending that we have always been diverse? How does this left-wing claptrap get printed in a national newspaper? One good point came out of this article, however: if we were multicultural once and managed to reverse it, we can do it again. So these sorts of creating these kinds of versions of the past has a great deal of baggage associated with it. And my sort of interest in these areas really relates to the ability of interpretation, simulation, reconstruction, to communicate, but also in its ways that it can challenge and confront perceptions about the ancient world. Now, Caistor is a site, Venta Icenorum, is a site that I've been involved with for about 12 years, carrying out excavation and survey. And it's a site which has seen a number of different iterations of these types of reconstructions. First, we had a painted reconstruction, then we had the first computer-generated reconstruction in the sort of early 2000s, and then this is one that I did with Channel 4 for a Time Team program, in which I deliberately wanted to make the Roman town look darker and more messy and have animals and steaming heaps of dung present in it, because I wanted to experiment with presenting different versions of the Roman past. In 2015, we created the first augmented reality interpretation for the site, and this was something created by Jam Creative Studios in collaboration with the Norfolk Archaeological Trust and our team at the University of Nottingham. And this was very much of the type of augmented reality which is becoming increasingly common at archaeological sites, in which the viewer stands at one particular point and then gets different representations of the past, and you could have your tablet or your phone and swing around and look at how the site was in that particular moment. And these sorts of things are quite common. A lot of on-site VR experiences, particularly which are becoming increasingly common at sites, rely on the viewer being static and looking from a series of pre-established viewpoints. And this is because primarily for safety reasons, in that once you've got a headset on, you can't move about because you're going to fall over bits of archaeological site, crash into other people, and it will all go horribly wrong. What these often do is focus on buildings in particular and present static versions of the landscape without the people that inhabited the landscape. What we wanted to do with our new project as part of this AHRC Immersive Experience program was to create an immersive experience that could be accessed via mobile devices in an environment with no infrastructure and very variable mobile signal. What we wanted to do was see if we could do it, evaluate the ways in which our users interacted with, to what extent they were immersed with such an experience or believed it. Address the sorts of technical challenges involved with delivering this kind of experience, and use our pilot project again to experiment with developing interpretations that challenged visitor perceptions of Roman Britain. We wanted our visitors to be able to experience a VR version of our semi-derelict Roman Forum and to interact with individual characters via their mobile devices while being able to physically move through real space. We wanted also to create soundscapes for them, to get also the sound and to get people to talk to our characters. The environment that we created and our characters drew directly on the evidence from the Archaeological Research Project. And the experience allowed viewers to drill down further into different layers of information should they wish. The user goes through a narrative in which they meet a series of characters who will speak to them and offer them a series of options. These options are something of an illusion because actually they all really lead to the same story. Here you can choose I'm seeking a healer, do you know one, or I want a beer. But actually both those options will ultimately lead you to the same story, in which you are a visitor who are provided with a remedy for an eye infection. And finding the 3rd century Latin for gammii proved quite challenging. The characters are activated by moving towards them. You physically walk towards them and you stand in these green circles, and these indicate what characters you are supposed to visit next. This also involved some interpretive challenges, such as creating an authentic late 3rd century British Latin for our characters to speak. And we used a script devised by my colleague Alex Mullen, who's working as part of an ERC project on the spread of Latin in Western Europe. And users would hear a snatch of this Latin before a translation is placed over the top. So probably most of the users weren't necessarily aware of the subtleties of our late 3rd century British Latin, but nonetheless it was an interesting thing to try and create it. The app uses what Jam Creative Studios call markerless AR, which is effectively based around using the phone's camera, gyroscope and accelerometer to ensure that the real world movement of the user is tracked by the virtual environment on their phone. You're guided by GPS to the start of the experience, and then you carry out a treasure hunt, scanning the ground for objects to collect buried artifacts which actually inform the story. And what this actually does is fix the position of the app, so the forum is then reconstructed in the right place. We conducted quite detailed evaluation of the user response to the experience to inform future iterations, and we had a series of group workshops using people of different ages, plus a group from a local school. The responses were very positive, although it was, of course, a child who first worked out that you can actually take a screen grab to photograph your friends alongside the forum, and we've used that quite a lot subsequently. The user groups responded very positively, and the colours on these graphs show different levels of experience with AR or VR experiences. And people reported themselves as being very much immersed and engaged with the project. And it really was surprisingly immersive. And even though you were looking at it on a small mobile phone, and people found themselves stepping over chickens and stepping sideways to avoid characters and the market stalls. The users on the site suggested that location was particularly important. Without location, without being there on the site, actually strolling across the field, it was felt that that would lessen the experience. And even people who are very familiar with the site reported seeing it in a very new light. People were particularly interested in the language used by the characters and the use of translation as opposed to hearing more of the original language caused quite a lot of debate in our feedback sessions. There were a number of challenges. It wasn't a perfect app by any means. It remains glitchy in certain aspects. It was very heavy on battery life, and sunshine remains a constant issue for anything using a mobile phone or tablet. we found that positioning occasionally tended to wander, and that was particularly the case if people put their hand accidentally over the phone camera, and that would mean the forum would be reconstructed in a slightly different position, and people found themselves getting gradually separated out, or occasionally you could find yourself floating up above the forum, or at a sort of mole's eye view of the forum looking up at it. And the richer and more detailed the animation, obviously the more phone power is needed and the more time is needed to create the experience. What's been interesting about this process, and I think what might touch upon our wider practice, is it forces us to consider things that I think sometimes get left out of the normal interpretation process for field archaeology. It forced us to think about things like, how did people dress? What languages were they speaking? What colour was the fur on their dogs? Because we actually have the ancient DNA evidence for our dogs to make our dogs the right colour. And these sorts of things are considered often in specialist reports, but I think sometimes they're left out of the narratives associated with excavation reports. And it's also, I think there is a reciprocal relationship, if you like, between the way that we consider these things and the sorts of rather empty environments that we tend to create in AR and VR reconstructions. And so might suggest that we could perhaps consider these sorts of simulations or reconstructions as more of an integrated part of the archaeological process. Because these types of simulations are one of the principal tools at our disposal for engaging with audiences. But equally, as archaeologists, we need to ensure that they are always driven as far as possible by the evidence, although of course there is an enormous amount of interpretation involved in this. But given the power of such images and experiences, I think it behoves those of us who work with them to work ever more carefully and reflectively with those who are creating them. And by placing this sort of activity at the heart of archaeology as a discipline, I think we're better engaged to move into a world where such technologies are becoming increasingly enmeshed within everyday life and the ways in which we present the past to the public. And I'll stop there. Thank you.